Hey, 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 what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 85 of the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 85. Before we get going here, I just want to apologize for the cruddy audio quality we had at parts of the show. Thanks to Frontier and their wonderful internet service, I had a really spotty connection, which cut Tyler out often. Nevertheless, our guest tonight today is Tyler Tisue. Tyler's been a frequent guest on the show, and he is a frequent guest because he's so successful in the whitetail woods, and he's just a ball of fun to listen to, and his tactics are spot on with what I guess I believe in, and I guess you can decide for yourself after listening to the show for today. I was lucky enough to be with Tyler on Monday night to track his buck. I wasn't there with him when he shot his buck. Todd and I were out hunting in Iowa, but we got the text message with a picture, and very shortly after that, we were headed over to where Tyler hunts to help him track his deer, which was a relatively short job. But nevertheless, it was a great deer, and I'm sure many of you have seen it on social media. If you haven't, go to our Facebook page and just look for Tyler's picture with that awesome buck that he shot. Without further ado, let's get started with the show. Again, sorry for the poor audio quality, and sometimes it probably sounds like Tyler's jumping around a bit, but that's just due to my internet connection, and I pieced everything together as well as I could. I thought it was too good of a show to just pitch and try and re-record, because it would be trying to duplicate something, and it's hard to be as authentic the second time around. So with that, here's our show with Mr. Tyler Tisue. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast. Tonight, I am solo. Todd is got other things going on, namely a baby shower. And I'm joined tonight by a frequent guest on the White Knuckle Podcast, Tyler Tisue, down in Iowa. Tyler, how's it going tonight?
It's going real good. I can't complain, obviously, since the season's been good to me here so far, but I'm happy to be on the podcast again. I absolutely enjoy, talking to you and Todd when he's around. So it's always a pleasure. Yeah,
well, I got the pleasure of taking part in, I guess, some of your success on Monday night. That certainly was an unintended consequence of being in Iowa, but it was cool to. It was cool to actually put my hands on the deer that you shot. That was a huge buck. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first off, I appreciate you and Todd coming and helping me, because it's never easy trying to do this stuff by yourself whenever you shoot one, especially like me. I mean, that's I hunt. My farm's like a couple hours away, and so whenever I drive down, I mean, I'm driving with my head on hair on fire and getting down there and hunting, and usually driving back on the same night, so it makes for long days. But yeah, I'll tell you the story a little bit of what happened. So it really started last year. For me, there was a deer that I just called him Short Brow 9, and he just had short brows, but was really wide, really tall. And I got a fair amount of trail camera pictures of him. I kind of knew the area, the general area where he was. He was 4 years old, at that time, and he was 5 this year. So I started. I guess, as you well know, so I killed my buck last year on October 19th. But even though I killed my buck, then I still go out and hunt, and most of the time I'm out there hunting to kill does or whatever. But ultimately, I'm really just doing research for the next year, trying to figure out, what is the buck that I'm possibly going to be hunting, that this next season, what is he going to be doing, now, and just really trying to get some reconnaissance, on that. So that's what I spent, last year doing, since I was fortunate to tag out early last year as well. And this buck was one that caught my attention. I knew he was going to be, 5 years old going into the season, and and he was he was, I wouldn't say he was complete homebody because I did not see him that often, but he was definitely around, enough where I knew he would be a huntable deer, for me the next year. And then, but I was slightly worried because he actually got shot by the neighbor. He got shot in the neck, and because I had the neighbor call me up, and he was like, "Hey, I shot this deer in the neck, and then I tracked the blood across your food plot and past your stand." I'm thinking, "Oh man, this isn't good," and he tried to describe, and then I actually sent him a picture of the deer, and he was like, "Yep, that's him." I'm like, "Okay, well, short brow 9, it's probably dead," but luckily enough, he actually ended up, showing back up, seemed, very, very healthy. And I got one shed off of him from last year, so I was fortunate on that. And so I know that I knew that he made it. So fast forward into 2018 this year now, and so I usually don't start running trail cameras until probably about late August. Mid to late August, when they're pretty well, fully developed, or actually, maybe a little bit earlier. But I just really don't care to see them in the growing stage. It's just not my thing. So I started run trail cameras, and he was one of the first ones I got on camera, and he was just the whitest deer I'd ever had on trail camera, and I was like, whew. He really, really popped out. Maybe that arrow that he got shot with last year, I don't know, maybe that's, added some growth somehow. I don't know. He just got weird, but I just never seen a deer that just laid outwards like he did. So he caught my attention, right off the bat. And so I continued to kind of throw some trail cameras in the area that I knew that he was. And I went in with the plan, of him. And I had a couple other deer that I was thinking about, trying to hunt as well. But he was certainly one that I was interested in. And actually, I didn't really know if I wanted to hunt him, even though I saw how wide he was and how, and how big he was. Being 5 years old, I typically like to hunt them, when they get to 6, if I have an opportunity.
Right.
And so I was a little hesitant since he was 5. I quite honestly hadn't shot a 5-year-old, in a while. I mainly tried going after 6s, but I said, all right, well, if this deer just does it for me, I'm going to hunt him because it's just hunting. I love it. If he does it for me, great. And so I'll get to the part where he did that for me. But so anyways, I'll go into a little more of the strategy and how it's kind of the strategy that I really plan around, most of my October, hunts. My real theory is I try to develop a situation, where in a spot that I can hunt over and over, anywhere from, 4 to 5 times, consistently, not like, consecutive days or anything like that, sure. But a spot where I can get in and out. So what I, for this particular spot, where I hunted him, I developed a spot where, it was, I had a whole bunch of standing corn, and I planted standing corn, and then on the north side of that, I planted, just 40 yards where I could shoot over. It was basically a cereal grain plot, which consisted of, oats, rye, wheat, and Austrian winter peas, and then some clover, to come up next spring. Mm-hmm. And I tucked a ground blind, brushed it in corn, there, but it was in the area where I knew, this deer had frequented. So in my thought process was this, and it's one I've used in the past, is that, when I figure out a deer's kind of area, if you stick with those cold fronts, when they come around, like it did on Monday, we had an extremely, extremely good day, last Monday, where it was, the temperature was cold. It was northwest winds, it was a barometer of, 30.3, 30.4, absolute perfect conditions, for mid-October. So I'd hunted that spot actually, I think maybe 2, maybe 3 times prior to that on other cold fronts, because we've had so many great cold fronts, here this October. But really up until last Monday, I really hadn't seen, anything for any maturity. And I really wasn't even getting trail camera pictures of anything, that was mature. But because of the history, that I had, in that area, and knowing that, that he was there, that I'd just continue putting in the time, whether I had a trail camera picture or not. Because what I figured was that, these deer, they're feeding on acorns. If you walk around any of the timber, this year, you notice that the oaks just poured acorns onto the ground. And it's like, okay, guarantee that these deer, they're on the acorns, they're just moving in the timber. And I just didn't really feel like I didn't have to go after him in the timber,
right.
during this time. Like, just play it out, be patient,
yep.
And see if, he'll eventually make that mistake and come out, as long as I don't keep on, or if I don't booger him up. And
let me just ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
And sorry for interrupting, but I'm dying to ask. So if I'm painting this picture correct in my mind, you haven't gotten trail camera pictures of this deer recently, or at least anything that's compelling enough really to put you in the exact spot that you're in. You just went there because, fill in the blank for me.
I had pictures of him at 12 to 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 days prior, which in my mind, where it was a quarter mile away where I was getting this picture, in my mind, I was like, okay, where he's normally bedding, it's very likely that he could have just walked all the way over there in that amount of time. If I got a picture closer to, if it was closer to like 7 or 8 o'clock, then I'd be like, okay, he's bedding more over this way. I mean, I might have to change up some strategy. But since it was, so late at night, that was really the only picture that I had since, let's see here, September, I think 26th was the only picture I had of him prior to that. But once they turn 5 and 6 years old, you typically don't get a lot of trail camera pictures, of them during that time, especially if you don't have anything, right where they're feeding, in the like I said, on acorns or whatever it is. I typically run them, most of my trail cameras over scrapes, during that time period.
Sure.
That's just where I get the most pictures. But, with him, it just didn't surprise me. But because I had, the prior year experience with him, I just figured, okay, it's just a matter of time before you make a mistake, and come out this way. Back to the 15th of Monday, when you helped me. So one day, I don't know, like a week prior, where I got out there at 3:30 in the afternoon and deer were already feeding, I just couldn't get out of work any earlier, and 6 deer were out there, and I actually crawled into the ground blind with deer feeding, 10 yards from that blind. That's how easy, it can be when you create the right situation. And then that's why I absolutely, it's such a deadly way to do it if you can do that, and, coming right in from the back on, in a brushed in blind and corn.
So on that, I lost you there for a second. So let me just back up for just a minute. So on Monday night, you had deer actually out there in front of you.
No.
Oh, okay.
The week prior I did. So that I was just trying to say how deadly of a situation it can be, where you can get in and out, of this. That's why I was saying, if you can create a situation, this is just one example, of creating a situation where you can get in and out of a spot, without being detected. Because what I was getting at was, that a week before or whatever it was, that I was able to crawl into this blind with 6 deer feeding in this feed plot. I mean, some of them 10 yards, from the blind. And, so I was still able to crawl into this blind and not bust every deer off that feed plot and crawl in there and still hunt. So it's just a tremendous way. I really like, that tactic, for getting in and out. There's a bunch of different, other ways, but that's just, one example of, this one here. So like I said, fast forward here to this Monday night, crawled in, and it was a little bit different situation, compared to that week before. The week before, a rainstorm had just stopped. I don't know, probably 2 o'clock, 2:30. probably temperatures, highs in the 50s, and and lows. I think lows was like 34, 35, I think, that day, and barometer at 30.3, 30.4, so perfect conditions. But I really didn't have many deer that came out on the plot till probably it gets dark at like 6:55. I think, don't quote me on that, if it was that's when shooting light was done or something like that. But deer didn't start showing up out there until probably closer to 5:30. There was some a doe and a 3-year-old came out, and they didn't really come in the food plot, just kind of followed each other a little bit, playing around. The action didn't really start until the last half hour, and there was a let's see here, a real nice 3-year-old came out, and followed by a real nice 4-year-old. And they came out and came out to the food plot that I had, and soon after there was a nice actually another nice 4-year-old, but he was, quite honestly, he's probably more of a cull buck. He was really just a 3-point one side and small 4-point side on the other side, but came out, and that 4-year-old, that nice 10-pointer that was out there, and then this more of a cull buck started just sparring out in the middle of the food plot, and then and they were probably 35 yards away at the time, and probably the last 15 minutes of shooting light, legal shooting light, come around the corner is this big wide one, and I saw him, and I just never seen anything that wide in the wild. Just seeing this deer that's literally twice as wide as every, these are nice deer that I'm looking at. I mean, they're not giants, but they're very, very nice deer. I mean, the one 10-pointer that was 4-year was probably 150-inch 10-pointer. Very nice, respectable deer. And this deer was twice as wide. And so this deer, starts coming out, and that this nice 10-pointer comes out and starts sparring with him. And what was hilarious is that this deer was so wide, he hated sparring with this younger 10-pointer, because the 10-pointer he was narrow, and he was just putting his headgear right into his forehead. And you could just see, and so this deer was just turning his head and trying to turn his entire body and use his left or his right horn to kind of torque on one side, and didn't want to go at him straight on because he was just too wide. He literally couldn't fight the deer. and the 4-year-old actually kind of bullied him and pushed him away, and finally the wide one just kind of stepped back and was like, I'm just gonna eat some food. And so then that nice 4-year-old just kind of walked across the plot there, and he was kind of a little edgy at that point, and he's actually looking at my blind. I'm sure it still looked off, no matter how much you brush it in, it's just still a little bit different there. He was looking at the ground line, looking at me, and of course I'm getting nervous. I'm like, crap, does he already notice me in here? So he started feeding, and he was slightly quartering to, but then he put his head up and turned the opposite direction. So, so he opened up that chest, a good bit. And so I drew, and I get settled in. As soon as I get settled in, he turns his head right back towards me and starts feeding again. And he's just quartering too much up, on me. And, so I actually let the bow arrow back down. And so then I'm holding the, the bow out there, and I don't know if he saw my, I had my broadhead, sitting, and of course it's silver, and and I have it just at the edge of the window in a ground line, and
sure.
I actually look at it, and the thing's shaking, so much, and I'm thinking that that's actually what he's seeing. so I'm trying to steady that arrow out as much as I can, because he's looking directly in me, and I feel like he's just just looking, just staring right in my soul, and I'm like, oh, I don't know whether I'm going to get another opportunity to shoot him here. So he stood there and just stared and stared and stared, and finally he took a few more steps, and when he took those steps, I was able to get drawn again, and boy, he really keyed in the blind, right after I drew, and he was 30 yards or so right then, and I just put it right behind the shoulder, let her eat, and sure enough, saw that, and I saw the shot, and I saw that arrow, drop about 5 yards after he took off running, and started watching, and he kind of did that, a little bit of limp leg, towards the end of the run, and I'm like, he's got to be dead, because I really couldn't see the impact, that well, since it was starting. It was probably the last 5-10 minutes of light at that point.
Sure.
And so I didn't see much of the impact, and so he ran, and I'm like, I think I made a good shot, and of course walked out. Of course, the rest of the story, where you guys ended up coming out and helping me and found found where the blood was, and sure enough, he really just died right after probably within 5-10 yards of the last time I saw him when he was running. So yeah, it was a perfect hunt. Probably the only thing, bad thing about the hunt for me was that that's done. It's the
right
thing. I've only got one tag here in Iowa for bow season, so I don't know. I'm gonna have to figure out another state or something to go to here this year if my wife will let me.
Well, that's kind of been your deal the last couple of years, hasn't it? I mean, you killed one a year ago tomorrow, right?
Yep.
And then now again on the 15th of October. What was the year before?
Last year was the 19th. I'm a really, here's the thing, is that if you're going to go after a single deer, us guys who chase single deer, we typically hate November, just because they're so hard, to try to kill once November hits, because they could be in a draw, a half mile away or a mile away at that point, trying to push a doe out around. So I am not a November fan at all.
Right.
I really, which is, most people think I'm crazy, but if I didn't know a deer, or if I was just going to an area, I would love to just go hunt November. I'd probably just go sit in doe bedding areas, I know when they're chasing one deer, not all the time, and certainly everybody, still has good opportunities every now and then, but a lot of the guys I know that when they're chasing those big ones, they usually don't get back into them, consistently until later November. So it just makes a really, really long season, if you don't kill them in October if you're chasing a single deer. So I'm just a big fan of, like I said, of October and cold fronts. I don't hunt, if I'm hunting anything besides cold fronts, it's probably, some sort of south wind spot that I can quite honestly just go kill does. Because I love the management side, and I just love shooting does whenever I have the opportunity. Or I will hunt mornings sometimes in October, but I'll go to a spot where it's not anywhere close to where, where I'm trying to, shoot whatever big buck I'm going after, in the mornings, just because they can definitely, you can educate some deer going in the mornings in October. Probably the only other times that I even hunt morning, I will hunt an October morning if we just get stupid good pressure, 30.4 super high, and, temperatures really, really cold, maybe, close to a frosty morning, where it's just, very drastic, day. So I will hunt those for mornings. Otherwise I maybe hunt once, chasing after the buck I'm going after maybe one time a season, I'll hunt a morning, but it's rare. I'm just not a big morning fan in October.
Backing up here, just because I lost your audio because of my poor connection, you essentially, you made a decision to hunt there. Just, it sounds to me like from previous knowledge of hunting the area, really, and knowing that this deer or a deer, not maybe specifically this one, was likely to be out there at that particular night just because of the weather?
In my opinion, that if you play the cold fronts there, I mean, and if you have, like in this situation, I like those early season cereal grain plots, because deer just find it absolutely delicious, during October. And in my opinion, where I figured if I could sit there on at least 5 of the best cold fronts, that were coming up, eventually this deer would end up showing up. And, I think that this was my 4th sit that I'd had on one of these October cold fronts on it. So,
okay.
4th one.
Okay.
I finally get them. So it plays about 20-25% chance, that I've seen, as long as, and it depends, that's not everybody's situation, but it was, more mine because, there's one spot I know that doesn't get any pressure, and then, 100 yards over, it gets a lot of pressure.
Sure.
So I kind of knew the spot where they want to be. And so that's where I was, that's where I planned on putting the food plot.
Okay. So obviously you've had a lot of good luck in October. Last year you killed on the 19th. This year you killed on the 15th, and it's largely, your success. What would you attribute it to? Just simply playing the weather, or I guess, is there something else that you're doing in terms of intel that you're getting that's leading you to believe that you should sit in a particular spot?
The intel that, so whenever I'm trying to get, intel there, I mean, I generally cast a wide web, with whatever trail cameras I can, and or like I said earlier, from past seasons, of watching the deer, and maybe even taking an up, saying, okay, the deer's not here, so I can cross that out as so I'm also crossing out areas that these deer aren't in at the same time. But in a general sense, let's just say that you have a 160 acre farm or something like that, and you got 5 or 6 cameras, and maybe I cast 5 or 6 cameras around all around it, and I get a picture of this big deer on 2 of them. I'll maybe move 2 more kind of around that area, and somewhat try to narrow down, okay, the deer's coming from this way, and then if you look, you can generally analyze your own area and say, okay, that's where the cover is. Maybe it. If you can walk it in the past, and I'm a big, I'm really big into shed hunting, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm shed hunting, I am analyzing every single piece of, timber in there. I'm looking at scrapes. I'm looking at, I'm looking at rubs. I'm looking at the bedding areas, the potential bedding areas that are there. I'm trying to find the thick spots, and I'll go walk in those bedding areres or wherever it is, and I'll squat down, look, try to see, is this a spot where I'd like to be? And I've just kind of figured out, there's certain spots, that, a lot of these, it depends on the area and the situation of what these deer are experiencing, because every single one of these deer are different. And you obviously have to adjust to that situation. But in a very general sense, I've, just found a lot of these mature bucks, they generally like to be in, I found them to be in a lot of spots, maybe, a third off the top of the hill, in a spot where the wind swirls, maybe a funnel, where the wind's just swirling all around. They generally like to bed in those spots. It makes them really difficult to hunt right where they're bedding a lot of times, especially if you don't have, the right winds, because they're using that to their advantage every single time. In a spot where, once you get into October, especially during this time of year, once they start getting, curious, which, I found, pretty much around this 15th, maybe going to come in a little bit earlier there, and they start paying attention. And so you'll find them bedding in these spots that are, maybe a funnel area where they know this doe's coming down. They'll be able to go check that doe out real quick, but then you have like a situation like where I was hunting, with the food plot, just in front of the corn with the blind brushed in. And they're going to go out there and check, try to get out there, check the rest of does, feed, whatever it is. And you were with me, obviously, the night when we found him, and we opened up his stomach. If you remember right, he had a pretty diverse combination of food in the stomach, where he had a bunch of whole acorns in his stomach. He had a bunch of green browse in his stomach, and he had a bunch of corn. And for me, I kind of narrowed down, the areas where he was. I knew he didn't have beans. At least we didn't see any beans in there, so I knew he wasn't feeding in, a couple other areas.
Mm-hmm.
So it narrowed down, exactly where I kind of knew where this deer was certainly, feeding during that time.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, there's, every single one of these, these deer are different, and he was no exception. I didn't find any reason necessarily go after him during this time of year, just because I felt like that'd be more damaging. situations would change. If it was a high pressure situation, with, because typically whenever you're getting if you're hunting high pressure deer, it's not that they're really leaving the area,
right.
For the most part, they're just really not coming out, I know, and I completely avoid that spot, but there's a spot right next to it that I completely stay out of, that I know that they're going to, be in because of it. And I know that the majority of them will be in there because of that. It literally might as well be right next to public hunting. I'm not kidding you. So I was just fortunate, that have the right situation for this, but this deer, like I said, he wasn't it's not like he was, completely unkillable or nocturnal or anything like that. It just happens to be, there's always time when any one of these big mature deer are going to make a mistake. I don't care what, guys say, oh, this deer is, not killable or whatever. They're all killable, to be honest with you. It's because they're all going to make a mistake. The weather's going to get up. It's just like every one of us, you can't be a 25 to 45-year-old male and just sitting on your butt every single day your entire life. There's gonna be a day where, like, all right, I feel like getting up and actually going and do something. Deer aren't any different. I mean, or just like the rest of us do, wind will get us in trouble as well,
right?
Does the same thing to those big boys, so
right.
So they're all killable. This happens to be just a situation where he was. I knew the general area, of where he wanted to bed, and I knew that would take, quite honestly, a cold front in order to get him there actually in time before dark. And it wouldn't have been any other situation. Now, I will say the difference was it was a southeast wind. And, if you know the way these fronts kind of work, they sometimes they end up spinning around, pretty violently, to the southeast. And the way it worked last year, in my opinion, was the southeast winds a lot of times just make these real mature bucks kind of edgy because they, like I said, and this deer in particular that I killed last year was sitting, I know where he was bedding because I was, he was probably within 50 yards of him when I got into my tree stand, bedding in this little funnel. And in my opinion, what happened with that southeast wind was the wind just didn't swirl. And it wasn't swirling probably right there. And it just made him edgy. He couldn't smell anything. There were some does that were starting to work their way, to the west out of his, wind sight that were there. And not that he's like, trying to rut with these does, but these big boys like to keep, they like to keep, especially some of the ones that are kind of come in early, they like to keep pretty close tabs on them, starting around, like I said, about 15th time. And that's what that deer last year was. And when that wind, just spun violently out of the southeast, I was fortunate to be able to get into a real easy in and out spot again. And at the time they were actually combines, that had just gone through there, which that's another thing that I love hunting, those areas actually right after the combines, are going through, harvesting corn and or beans. Mm-hmm. It doesn't scare the deer, but it sure gets them up and active. And so that was just another thing where I knew that was happening that day. I knew that the combines were in that area, and so I like to be there, during those times because you don't know if it just gets them up and moving.
Right.
And I had an easy in, easy out spot, and so that's how I was able to capitalize last year. And this year, I don't know if the story cut off, in our session earlier of how I killed him. And tell me if it did. I'll tell the story again.
I think we got most of it, and it's still cutting in and out, but we're definitely getting most of it. I guess the one thing that I wanted to ask you, if I'm not interrupting you, just tell me.
Absolutely.
How? So let's say Tyler doesn't shoot one in October.
Yep.
Or at what point in October does your tactics change, or don't they really change until that 5th, 6th of November? Are you still hunting the fronts, hunting the food? Because really, that's where they're going to be, isn't it?
Not necessarily the food. I'm not a food guy at all once November really hits. Maybe a little bit. I mean, I'm kind of watching the situation. But once we start getting into, more November, I'm probably in two spots. I'm either really close to a bedding area or I'm in a funnel that's probably not too far off of the bedding area either. Or a pinch point, or, something that's going to narrow those deer, down for me. And it's typically going to be in an area, that's, a lot closer to the area of whatever deer, that I have a big history with.
Sure.
So whatever November has come, and I've had, plenty of success, luckily in November as well. But most of the time, like I said, I hate it. I hate November because they're just all over the place. And, where a lot of guys, like, hey, bounce around different bedding areas, different funnels, whatever it may be. I pretty much pound a similar area. So long as if I have an area or, an area situations where I can get in and out of, somewhat easy, I'll pound those areas, especially if I know this is the history that I have this deer. This is where I know he likes to be. I want to be close to this bedding area here because he's eventually going to make that mistake. I don't go bounce around. I'm not going to say, okay, here, I'm going to go to this spot here one day. I'm going to go to this spot here another day. No, I pretty much stick in that area because eventually that deer is going to show back up. And, and a lot of times, unfortunately they're chasing does or whatever it is, and you just can't get a shot on them or you can't get them to stop. I mean, I've had so many encounters with, the big deer that I'm chasing in November, and it's just, they're just so wound up, that I can't get them killed,
right.
Because of that, or they're just doing in November, they're just kind of doing some things they just don't normally do.
Right. Making mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, well, they're making mistakes. I'm just not either, smart enough and or dumb enough to capitalize on it.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's sometimes you're just not going to slow one of those freight trains down. I mean, you could have a referee's whistle and blow it, and they wouldn't stop for all the tea in China, basically. I guess let me ask you a question that I had written down.
Yeah.
At what point do you start hunting? I know you said you hunt very sparingly. You'll hunt mornings in October. But at what point do you start hunting mornings in October? Or don't you?
Typically, no, it's going to depend on, a little bit more on the weather. But if it starts getting cold, on like the 26th, 27th, yep. I will hunt mornings. I've had great success during those times as well with some really big deer in the morning during that time. But if it's like, I just, I don't like, no matter what, it doesn't matter whether it's, November 7th, a day that typically deer really move well. But if it's 75 degrees, and just kind of just super warm weather, I mean, those are even days that, I'll even question, even though it's November 7th, about going out just because it's just
right.
so warm and that they just don't move well no matter what. But so long as the weather, is okay, then, the weather really dictates, a good majority of when I'm going to put a lot of pressure, because, I'm not a professional hunter, as you well know. I mean, I have a job, I mean, I sell real estate, and I also have a medical device, business as well, so it's not like, I only have time to go and hunt all the time. So I have to really choose my days, appropriately, whenever I do, because I can mix and match my schedule a little bit, to those better days. I'm fortunate to be able to do that, but I can't go and hunt like every single day, during the week, so if I can mix and match things, the warmer days, I just avoid, I don't even go hunt them. Of course there's chances. Everybody knows when it comes to November and late October, I mean, you have a chance anytime. Absolutely you do. Does that mean you need to be out there every single day doing it? Not necessarily. I mean, especially if you don't have a ton of acres or anything like that. And right. I really don't have that many acres to hunt, either. I mean, I've got a decent amount, but not a ton. I mean, I mainly hunt, 160 to 250 acres probably, anymore. So not really that much. I got to be honest. I was looking at, when we were leaving that night driving out, I'm like, I got to look this place up on Onyx. So I pulled it up on Onyx, and
a little bit surprised. I was expecting to see, not that where you're at isn't good, but oftentimes I guess what I'm learning after doing all these podcasts is what you have conjured up in your mind isn't always isn't always exactly the way it's going to look. You've got a good property, obviously, but it's not like you've got 400 acres of contiguous timber and the perfect situation around every corner. You've got challenges just like everybody else does.
Oh, tons of them.
Yeah,
and,
I could see that from. It looks like to me your timber is really segmented, and then where you do have a good chunk, you're going to have to deal with another landowner maybe, or something like that. And I'm not 100% sure because I don't remember exactly, but I guess the bottom line is at the end of the day, it's it's not like you're hunting a game farm. It still takes some pretty calculated moves and. If there's one theme that I always get out of podcasts like this, is that patience is so much more a part of the game than I ever thought it was.
Every single year, I typically take notes, or I keep like a hunting journal. Mm-hmm. And I actually, before this year, I started to go through my different notes, that I had, and I just actually keep it on my phone, through the notes thing on, on this, on my Apple phone here, and it says, like the top of, like 2 years in a row was like, do not go, into a spot in October unless you have an exact reason, for being there. Because I've made way more mistakes than I've made, good decisions. I can tell you that 100%.
Sure.
And just what I've learned over the years was, is that, play the right days. Don't have, here's what starts to happen is, as you well know, is you start to see guys starting to knock down big deer everywhere on social media. We all see this and we're like, and then we all start, the hair on the back of our necks, starts to stand up and get fired up. Man, I can taste it. I want to get out there and go, kill a big deer. You got to reel that back. And that's just the reality. You got to look at your situation. You got to know, the deer that you're chasing, just because one guy's situation, just because my situation, of what I have doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You really, every single one of these deer are so much different. I mean, I know I've had situations, where the deer does not live on my property at all. I mean, and he will only maybe come on my property, a couple times maybe in October total. And I've had times where I've actually hunted a lot in October because I know it's going to be the only times where I actually do get, you have to be in those situations because he's just not going to, he's just, that buck's just maybe coming over every now and then to check some things, but it's not his normal everyday thing. And so when you get, when you're hunting kind of a, let's call it a satellite type one, there's situations where you have to hunt a lot, and just be in that area and just wait for them to come through in some sort of pinch or some sort of funnel or, that you can get in easy, in and out. I've had that, happen in the past where I'm chasing a really big deer and that's what you have to do. And, the one I'm thinking about in particular, I didn't end up getting, I had, let's see here, 2 or 3 close encounters of and it was pretty much the only times where he came through at all, but you just have to adjust to the deer. I mean, if you're hunting, when you get into hunting single deer, which it's my favorite thing in the entire world. I mean, I absolutely love it. But once you start getting into these single deer, there's generalizations that I use. But then, I guess I'll use the generalizations as the basis, I stick with the cold fronts, I try to hunt, when I hunt those cold fronts, I'm trying to hunt very close, to wherever that bedding area is.
Right.
The closer I can get, the better. And the situation I can create that's easy in, easy out, the better as well. But it does not always work out that way. And then you got to adjust that deer. You got to do some different things. Maybe, run and gun, hang some tree stands, in the middle of the season, change up your tactics. Maybe the farmer goes and, logs, a bunch of timber, or something, has to go cut firewood in the middle of your timber. And it's like, well, all right, I know that deer's not going to be there, and that's where I was planning on hunting. You got to adjust, go over this way. So there's, there's a lot of different things that you just got to adjust to the, that deer. But that's the fun part about it. Once you get one in your head, then you end up having to, that's when you really become a hunter, and you just have to really, and I don't say that in not putting down anybody on that. And I'm saying is that just where you really have to figure out just different ways. It's not just, hey, go sit in this tree stand. It's like, you know what? I got to figure out a different way to do things, and it's not the way that's always going to be comfortable to me.
You're right. Because after hunting public last year, and now hunting private again this year, on the lease that I've got, and then down in Iowa, it's two really very separate games. Each of them take, if you're going to hunt a singular deer, you got to be, you got to have a steel stomach, so to speak. And if you're going to hunt public, you got to be willing to put in the work. And it's no different with hunting one deer. If you're gonna hunt one deer, you got to be willing to put in the work. It's just different kind of work. Would you agree with that?
It's definitely different kind of work. I mean, I don't know if like I said, I don't know if there's one, necessarily single strategy that works. I've got my generalizations that I stated, but if I can tell you, it would also change, if I was hunting one single deer and maybe it was on public land, I might not go and chase a single deer, because then you're talking about something that, there might be a variable where, hey, this, Joe Blow went over there and completely blew the area out. So I also want to put things in my favor as well.
Sure.
With higher, I try to play the odds, in everything I can. If there's deer that's more killable, to go and hunt, and I can do it, I'll go and do that one, more instead of, if I'm also at the point in my life where, I don't go and kill anything, for anybody else. But if that deer really, makes me, happy and that gets my heart going, by all means, I'll go and kill him. But yeah, you gotta, if a deer is just not very killable, sometimes it's not worth it. Especially if that, hey, I got a job, I got a wife and kids, at home. I'm not going to be able to put in 30 days, into this deer. I'm going to go after a deer that's, a little more killable. That's going to be more enjoyable for yourself. So like I say, you got to adjust to the situation. That's probably the biggest thing, that I've learned over the years. And you can take the generalizations, but you got to adjust to your situation.
Right.
Analyze it, have some sort of idea, what the deer are doing, whether they're being pushed by the neighbors, whether or not they have pressure in a certain area, or they have no pressure in a certain area, are they bedding, over here, where do you think they're feeding? And
Sure.
You kind of put together, just a general sense of, what your deer herd in the area is doing. And if you got a buck that does it for you, you want to go kill him, by all means, figure out a way to go kill him.
Let me. You had the perfect segue there in terms of making adjustments and adjusting it to your situation. I'm gonna, I guess, be a little bit selfish here and ask some general questions that maybe relate to me, or not necessarily just me, but maybe more of the general public that maybe isn't hunting a specific deer. I would consider you pretty much a trail camera expert. And when I say that, I mean, it seems like, in talking to you in the past, you've done a good job scouting with your trail cameras. And you've had some success in terms of finding out a deer's core area. And I don't know whether you agree with that or not, but let's just assume that you do for a second. And if you're getting pictures of a deer consistently now, October 18th, is it safe to assume that if you're getting those pictures at any time of day, fill in the blank, that you're relatively close to that deer's core area?
Relatively, yes. Once again, so wherever I'm getting those pictures, I'd want to analyze and say, okay, like the example I used earlier, where I had a trail camera where I got a picture of the big wide deer I killed here on the 15th.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of knowing that deer's past, I knew that he had been traveling along. He probably traveled a long ways to actually go over there, check out does over in that bedding area. Now, if I'm getting pictures, anytime, that 12, whatever, which that's just typical. That's going to be typical this time of year, especially if it's, if there's not really any type of fronts. But if if you're getting them, during that time, I think, in my opinion, like I said, one out of those 5 times in those cold fronts, you're probably going to get him to daylight. And one of those spots, one of those areas probably close to there at some point. So I if that deer is coming in there now, every situation is different. My situation, if, like I said, that deer was a quarter mile away, at 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, I ended up, killing him, probably, much closer to his general bedding area that I believe that it was. But it also started to tell me, hey, he's at least getting up and starting to check on some does. He's getting more active. I knew what he was doing when he was over there. At least I feel like I do.
So,
and
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So if you're starting to, if a large part of your strategy is going to revolve around trail camera pictures, and I think sometimes that's a bad idea, and sometimes it's a good idea. But if a large part of your strategy, like for me, I'm 2 hours away like you are, so I'm relying on my Spartan cameras to tell me the story when I'm not there. And if you're starting to get some relative consistency, even if it's at midnight or 1 a.m, of a deer visiting, say a community scrape, it's safe to say, he's probably bedded somewhere within a mile of there. And then is it also safe to assume that as we go through the days here, as we get closer to Halloween, you should see probably, if he's bedded close to that community scrape, if he's showing up earlier, that he's probably bedding closer?
I do tend to believe that. Now, of course, there's a lot of different factors that's going to change that. I mean, if you're talking about a deer that probably is, relatively unpressured during that time, or he's in a spot, he's not getting a ton of pressure. I mean, I think that very well could be the situation where he's just going to, if you're getting pictures of him, closer to daylight, he's probably, somewhat closer, to those areas.
So I want to apologize and say this is where I lost Tyler for a bit because of my poor internet connection. Thank you very much to Frontier Internet Service. That's a whole nother subject. But anyway, we're just going to rejoin our conversation where he's talking about what it is that he does when he hunts these high traffic areas to get out of there virtually, I guess, undetected. So here's Tyler again.
Helps me, not get quite as busted as I carry a coyote call with me into the tree stand every single time. So when I'm leaving, I'll actually just start just ripping up with the coyote call, trying to blow out any deer that are real close to me, because I just don't want them to know I'm there. And that sounds like a crazy thing, but especially if there's any deer that are there, I'll rip out that coyote call, try to domino some of them out of there, because I just don't want them to know that I'm in a tree stand right above them, and start to educate them, for even if they're yearlings or whatever, because eventually, yearlings get older and they start to get smarter, and I just don't like educating deer no matter what. So I've become a pretty big fan of using a coyote call to clear fields.
Would you say that I thought about this the Tuesday night. I left Iowa midday, headed back up to my lease, and was sitting on a field just because I had done some stand work, and I'm still trying to figure this property out. And I was sitting on a bean field, and I just thought to myself, is this stupid of me to do? I just was simply out there for the simple fact that I wanted to be out there, but I got to thinking, this field is going to be full at dark, and I'm going to be sitting here wanting to get the heck out of here and make the 2-hour drive home. Am I going to do more harm than good? Do you think that could become a problem if you're hunting field edges and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because no matter what, you're leaving stuff on the ground, right?
Yep.
And probably even if you clear the field, there's probably deer that are standing on the edge of the timber still watching you walk across that thing. So no matter what, it's not something, that you really have to analyze your situation and kind of have a sense where, I don't like to put too much pressure, on areas. I will analyze those situations. Now, if the weather, continues to be really, really good or something like that, I'll maybe put a little more pressure into an area, just because if I see like, hey, I got 3 days of really cold weather and then, then maybe, 5 days of warm weather after that, I'll probably just continue to put a little more pressure because of that. Even though I may bust a few more deer, but I do know that, once the warm weather comes, well, I'm probably not going to see as many deer anyways. So there's gives and takes, when it comes to that. But I'm not, if I had to, kind of rate, myself, as far as, like I'd consider Todd's a pretty aggressive, hunter. I've got other friends that are very, very conservative hunters. I mean, they absolutely just don't want deer to know that they're around the areas at all, and they've created situations they can't. I'm honestly, I'm in the middle. I get aggressive, at times, and other times I'm very, very conservative. But I try to play in that middle there. I don't try to, I don't want to blow up an area. Even though I've been able to, shoot big deer. It's not like, like you saw, it's not like my hunting situation is like the most killer situation in the entire world over there. I mean, I have to play it smart, if these deer are going to continue to be around there, because I could blow them out of that property in no time. So I tip, I don't want to say a generalization, of something where I, hey, hunt one day, come back 5 days later. I kind of let the weather the weather, the tree stands,
sure.
And those things kind of dictate, a little bit of the pressure, while being conscious, of how much pressure I am, putting on it. And, am I busting deer? Do I know I'm busting? Sometimes whether or not you're busting deer, and sometimes you kind of get a feeling. When you go back out there again, deer just aren't there. And it's like, maybe you didn't see them, but you go back out there and they just, there's not nearly as many there. And it's like, maybe they did kind of figure me out a little bit. So you start to get a sense, of those types of things. And you got to be conscious of that, that type of thing. Listen to your gut, when it comes to those things, and don't just always, be like a bull in a china house saying, hey, I just got to get out here. I got to hunt. I've been on, I know guys that, go on guided hunts, and it's like, yeah, you feel like you got to hunt every single day. Sometimes you don't, you really, there's days with some of these guys, that, if it's a stupid warm or something like that, go sit back, and get real high on try to just, view an entire area, do some scouting, get in a spot where you can, if you have to be out there, be in an extremely low impact spot, where you can be, where you can just analyze some of the deer in the situation, and maybe catch something at last light and be like, okay, hey, that deer is over there. And, maybe you can get after him, the next day when the weather gets better. So it's, I don't have an exact, I don't have an exact general way to do this there, but you definitely got to listen to your gut on some of this. And like I said, the weather, tree stands, those are going to dictate a lot of it. But when it comes to October, I'm really, when it comes to warm weather and like that, I'm not a fan, and I don't hunt it very often.
Right. So I know I've taken a bunch of your time, and I'd love to.
Oh, you're good.
When you said Todd's an aggressive hunter, we could do a whole show on how I feel about hunting with Todd after hunting with him one time. But there's a reason that you guys kill big deer, and it's not just because you're in Iowa. That's anybody who thinks that's the case is full of it, because it takes a certain amount of commitment and it takes a certain amount of knowledge and skill. But that said, I don't want to get off on that rabbit trail. I want to ask you, we're going to air this Monday morning. And Monday, whether you're in southeastern Iowa or in Wisconsin, it's going to be, in the mid to upper 50s, low 60s, relatively high pressure. That's the 21st of October. You've got a tag in your pocket. What are you still doing, or what are you going to change based on what we've talked about so far? And assuming the 5 days following that, because we're still not to that 25th, 26th area where, it's just a no-brainer, stuff's going to start going down. What is it that Tyler's going to do?
So, I mean, if I was going to an area, that I didn't, if I had to hunt, if I was hunting here to the, 21st to the, to the 25th, I'd probably be looking at a couple of different situations. First off, that, where are deer during that situation? Well, you're probably in that time where, the bucks, like I said, they're really starting to know which doe is going to come into heat early. So typically there's always, a really big deer that's going to be with the doe. So maybe, if I was going to a spot, boom, 21st, just going out, to an area, I'm probably going to be, if I had somewhat of an idea of the property, and try to get some sort of reconnaissance, on some of those deer, because obviously they're, like I say, you know what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to figure out where these does are. If I'm not seeing any deer on that time, if I got 5 days to hunt or whatever, I might go and try to, squeeze in a little bit closer to, that bedding area. Maybe I'm going to, the top of a ridge, where maybe they're still feeding on some acorns going across the ridge during that time. That's where the big boys, the does. Next, if I'm looking to get a little more aggressive after that here with 5 days to hunt, maybe I'm going towards that funnel, that's kind of close to that bedding area, during that time. It just depends on the situation. I mean, we're talking 5 days to hunt, it's a whole different ball game. I mean, you got to get a little more aggressive,
right.
Than an entire season.
Yeah. You broke up just a little bit there, so I just want to make sure that I get what you're saying, because I happen to have off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Perfect.
Yeah, but I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're probably a good tactic would be to slowly but surely put the squeeze on those typical areas where you're going to find yourself even on the 31st of October. But you're going to maybe do it a little bit slower and start with maybe a less pressured approach. Is that fair to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm looking at a situation where I probably just don't know it. Or like you said, hey, if I'm going to Wisconsin or something like that, I mean, that's, I don't really know, what I'm getting into. Of course, if I'm getting to that situation where if I'm going to a property, I'm probably analyzing aerial photos, I'm analyzing topography, I'm probably going to go and set up tree stand, that's close to those spots where I can, where everything kind of comes together. It's like, okay, the aerial photo says, this looks like a good spot, in the aerial photo here. The topography, looks pretty good. It's, maybe a higher spot. You can see it's probably some thicker timber, in this spot here, a nice little field edge, nice little funnel right over this way. So I'm looking at those things. I'm trying to put together an entire picture of, of where these deer, or how these deer are going to use this property. And in particular, how these bucks are going to use this property with the different winds. How can I use how can I use these wind, tunnels, to my advantage, to maybe take advantage of a buck's nose and my nose to sit, or I guess not my nose, but, my wind, at the same time. And, so try to put all those pieces together. I mean, so it's a very generalized question. I love it when, if we had a particular property, I'd try to break it down the best I could. But my general sense, on it would be, kind of work from the way, from the outside in a little bit. That depending upon, once again, if the weather is going to be, really, really, dynamite or something like that, and it's going to be really crappy, if it was going to be really crappy, for like, if it was really good for 2 days and it's going to be really crappy for 3 days, I'd probably be a lot more aggressive, probably in the first couple of days, than I would,
sure.
Than maybe the next three. So it just kind of depends on that. I mean, it depends on the situation and what you're hunting, but, bottom line is just get out there and do it. I mean, we're all gonna, you don't really, I can tell you everything, everybody else can tell you everything, but, until you get out there and start do stuff, learn stuff yourself, I mean, it's,
So again, I want to apologize to everyone for the crappy audio there. Tyler ended up cutting out, and I think you can all probably guess where he was going with that conversation. Just get out there and do it yourself, and you're going to learn eventually. You're going to probably make it your own, and that's kind of the point that he was trying to make there. So I hope you enjoyed that show. Do us a favor, give us some comments and let us know how you like the show today, and let us know what you'd like to hear in the future. We've got tons of different guests lined up, but what really matters is what you all think. So let us know. If you haven't done so, please give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, please make a comment, like it, do whatever it is that you all do on YouTube to show your like and or dislike for the show. It seems like there's always someone who likes it and there's always someone who dislikes it. So whatever the case, just give us your feedback so we can get better at what it is that we're doing. With that, I'll begin to close out the show for today. I want to remind everyone, if you haven't done so already, to head over to the Ozonics webpage. That's www.ozonicsHunting.com/WKP. There you will find the White Knuckle bundle. I know a ton of you have taken advantage of it. They're not done selling it yet. They haven't cut us off yet. Getting close, but again, if you haven't done so, go